Greetings and welcome to today's episode of 17 Minutes of Science. My name's Janice Weeks. I'm a co-founder and the Chief Global Health Officer of In Vivo Biosystems, and my background's in neuroscience and electrophysiology, so I'm super excited about today's topic. And we're very happy to have all of you with us today. It's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Dave Bjork. Dave's topic today is engineering a cure for Fragile X. So Dave's the Director of Community Relations at the FRAXA Research Foundation, the founder of the FRAXA Biotech Games, which we'll hear more about later, and a patient advocate. He has more than 20 years of progressive experience in nonprofit marketing, patient advocacy, and fundraising leadership roles, including Vice President of Development at the National Foundation for Cancer Research in Bethesda, Maryland. In this role, he launched several successful fundraising programs and became known as the Cancer Research Evangelist due to his dedication and commitment to basic scientific research. Bjork has made it his life's mission to connect individuals, businesses, academic institutions, and other key influencers to forge strong partnerships to focus on research. In his role at FRAXA, he's actively building strong relationships with Fragile X families and the scientific community, and he also advocates for the important role that patient groups play in working with the biopharma industry. Bjork earned a BS in economics and finance from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. With that, I'm going to start my timer for 17 minutes. There it goes. And let me remind you, if you have any questions for Dave as we go along, please type them in the chat box and we'll try to get to them. So my first question for you, Dave, is can you tell us a little about Fragile X syndrome?
Sure. And first of all, thanks, Janice, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. So Fragile X syndrome is is known as the most common inherited cause of autism and intellectual disabilities. And so it does cause a wide range of intellectual disabilities and also other symptoms such as hyperactivity and anxiety and hypersensitivity to sounds and seizures. And about 25% of the cases, it affects boys more than girls. The incidence is about 1 in 4,000 for males and about 1 in 6,000 for females. So it's a monogenic disorder, so I think there's a lot that we know about it, but of course it's a very complex neurological disorder. So in my work at FRAXA, the FRAXA Research Foundation, to the topic of what we're talking about, I think we really look at, I think we're at the point now where we're really engineering this complex project, like an engineering project, to try to find effective treatments and ultimately a cure for Fragile X, which is the mission of the FRAXA Research Foundation.
So what progress has the FRAXA Research Foundation made in Fragile X research, and what are you most excited about going forward with this disease?
Well, good question. So as I mentioned, we look now in 2020 as looking at it as an engineering project, but FRAXA has been around since 1994, and so started by some parents who had children with Fragile X. And so over many years, over the 25 plus years of FRAXA, we've learned a lot about the disorder, and we have done a lot of basic scientific research to uncover a lot of the targets and the phenotypes of Fragile X. And I think if you fast forward to where we are today, is we're trying to do that translation now into getting treatments into patients. So as an engineering project, there's several pieces, I think, to what we're trying to accomplish and in trying to hit some of those targets. And I think one of the areas is in clinical trials, where we're trying to focus on smaller trials to try to identify more objective outcome measures so that we can run smaller trials more effectively. And so we have some of those projects that we are actually funding. We've done some really interesting clinical trials recently with a company called Tetra Therapeutics, which we're pretty excited about. And we're also we're doing a lot of looking at repurposing of existing medications, which I think is very fascinating because these are, when we look at the timeline to develop a new drug, we look at repurposing as an opportunity potentially to shorten that time frame by using already pre-approved medications that are safe, like metformin, for example. And now we're working with a company called Helix in the UK, and using machine learning and a lot of the information that we've gathered over the years to try to identify compounds and combinations of compounds that we think could have an impact on Fragile X. And so now we've identified those compounds, and now we're going to work with Helix to try to move some of those into some small clinical trials. And then, of course, I think the third part of the project is looking at sort of the ultimate cure, if you will, for Fragile X, and that would be supporting things like gene therapy, CRISPR, gene reactivation, protein replacement. And so we're funding projects in that area as well. So, for example, a project at Mass General Hospital in the laboratory of Dr. Jeannie Lee, who's looking to use a small molecule cocktail to reactivate the proteins. So I think all those areas are really exciting to me. I think if you look at the patient community of Fragile X, we have the journey from the initial diagnosis, which is at the average age of around 3 years old, and I think thinking of, well, can we find a cure for Fragile X, right? Is that pie in the sky, and which I don't think it is, but I mean, it's like optimistic hope, I guess, of things like CRISPR. Could that ultimately someday, be a cure for Fragile X? But I think there's also a lot of the families in the community that just want to make life better for their child. So what can we do to find treatments that minimize the effects of the hypersensitivity and the anxiety and things like that? So, yeah.
Is there a prenatal test for Fragile X, or it's just diagnosed, in say 3-year-old-ish?
No, there is a blood test. You can have a blood test, to be identified with Fragile X.
So, say gene therapy techniques could be used even prenatally, potentially.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm not a scientist, so.
No, that's okay. I'm just thinking that's good that it can be diagnosed early.
Yeah.
There's a larger therapeutic window.
Right.
So, cool. So I know you had a background in cancer research. So how did you get involved with Fragile X work?
Another good question. There's actually, in some ways, it doesn't seem like a clear path to Fragile X from cancer, but I'm a cancer survivor, so that has long been my passion, and research has really been something that's really important to me. And I was working down in Maryland. Of course, I live in Massachusetts, so I was kind of tired of that commute, and I had come across the FRAXA Research Foundation. I knew about Fragile X actually because there's a family in my town that had a son with Fragile X. And I was on the school board in my town, and I often interacted with some of the kids with special needs to help them with their IEPs and kind of working through the special ed department. I became an advocate in my town for kids like that. And so when I came across the FRAXA Research Foundation, the model that they had was very similar to what I was already working in cancer, which is sort of that seed funding of being, leveraging small grants to help researchers get larger grants. So 50,000 here, 100,000 here, and really being all about research. I mean, that was the biggest thing for me, was because I'm so passionate about research. And it was that model of like identifying a lab and supporting like young postdocs within that lab, which I also think is really important, by the way, to continue to support young scientists. And then working with them so they can actually then use data that they get from the work that we support to apply to large grants at the NIH. And there's many cases that FRAXA has done over the years of doing that and opening up more doors and opening up new labs. So it really kind of was a natural transition. And then of course I learned later that, some of the people I know in cancer research that are doing epigenetics, for example, are very aware of what's happening in Fragile X, and so there's kind of these crossovers. So it's been a really rewarding journey for me.
And I have to just say those small sort of grants from foundations, those are so important, for driving research in new directions. And my lab got one from the Alzheimer's Association to start a new project in Alzheimer's that turned out really successfully. So
Right.
That's a really great strategy, I think, for a funding model.
Right. And for rare disease, I mean, we're the only group that's actually raising money for research. And so therefore we can be very efficient with the money that we raise and have a huge impact, really. And I agree with you. I think the example that you just gave, we do that. We have so many examples of that helping. And I think bringing more people into the field of Fragile X research. So this young postdoc, then she leaves MIT and goes to Stanford and sits her own lab and brings in more young people. So yeah, it's very important.
Okay, well, you've been described by others, and I think you've adopted this title as being a research evangelist. So could you say a little bit about that and what motivated you to become one?
I think probably what we just touched on was this area where these researchers that are doing a lot of basic research that I couldn't believe when I learned like 6 years ago that people at places like Mass General or Dana-Farber or Johns Hopkins, researchers that had to actually fund their own laboratories. I never knew that. I just assumed that if you work for Johns Hopkins, then you got a lab and you got all this money. And so anyway, I really felt like I wanted to be a voice for those people, to evangelize for them, to say these people, they shouldn't be spending 75% of their time fundraising, writing grants, pitching high net worth people and all that. They should be in the lab doing the work that they're meant to do. And so I think it's advocacy and just being completely passionate about research. And evangelist just kind of fit because the Greek meaning of evangelist is bringing the good news, and so I feel like my role is to bring the good news and to introduce the world to all these brilliant people who need support, who need funding. So
yeah. Thanks for that. So one of the many cool things to come out of your foundation is the FRAXA Biotech Games. So can you tell us a little bit about those and maybe what's happening with those in the year of COVID?
Yeah. Well, the Biotech Games is an idea that I had this idea in 2016, and it was an idea that to bring together the biotech community in a way to do something really fun for a good cause. When I came to FRAXA, it really kind of resonated even more so because when I started at FRAXA and understood what Fragile X and the fact that many people have never heard of Fragile X, and I know when I met with Mike and Katie, the founders of FRAXA, and talked about how do we get people who don't have direct connection with Fragile X to care about Fragile X. If you're not a parent or a grandparent or a sister or whatever. And so this idea emerged, well, how about if we did a fun event for the biotech community that would bring together people, do something fun, play, let's say, lawn games like cornhole and can jam as a networking event for the community to come together. And while we're doing that, we're not just looking for people that care about Fragile X. I'm looking for people who want to do something good, meet people, serendipity, potential new relationships, new collaborations, and compete against each other because they're all rivals. And there's a lot of that spirit within the Boston biotech community and others as well. But I live in Boston, so that's where we started it. And it just grew, and it was amazing. The funny thing is that a lot of the companies that did come were companies that did have an interest in Fragile X, maybe not big publicly known that they're interested in Fragile X, but they might be involved with other rare disease, or they might be in Huntington's disease or Alzheimer's or doing something else. And so that was really interesting to see those people come together. But yet there was also, companies that were from, oncology and other therapeutic areas. So it really evolved into a way that I felt as an evangelist and someone who's trying to raise awareness for a rare disease, we could bring people together for a good cause. So it was not a hand up your business cards kind of a networking event. It was really I always use a serendipity because I just feel like if you bring smart people and really interesting people together, good things happen. And that's the tagline I came up is when biotech companies gather, good things happen. So we had 64 teams last year compete. We had over 300 people in Cambridge. Knowing this year that we were not going to be able to get people together in person, we decided, to make it an online event this year. And so it's still happening. It actually starts next week, and it's going to be a series of trivia competitions online. And because I'm also a storyteller, the story about the Biotech Games is really, it started as this gathering of good people and unity in the Boston community. But so many good things have happened that I've seen in the biotech community since COVID started, and my son and my wife are both nurses, and so they had direct impact from the COVID crisis here in Boston. The biotech community in Greater Boston, including Mass Bio and Mass Medic and some other organizations, came together to unify and really rally the biotech community to donate PPE supplies and lab space and the spirit of collaboration. So I said, well, I want people to know about that. So why don't we make this a national story? Why don't we connect with other biotech hubs like San Diego and San Francisco and New York and Philadelphia and others, and we're all in this together. And so that's kind of the spirit of what happened. So we've got, the CEO of Mass Bio, Bob Coughlin, is involved, and it's awesome. I'm so grateful for that. And Joe Panetta from Biocom in San Diego and California Life Science Association and others. So the idea is we're kind of rallying around our individual hubs around the country, but we're all in this together. So that's kind of the spirit of the Biotech Games. And again, the beneficiary, it's all going to research. That's the whole idea is all the money that we raise is going to go right back into support the biotech and research and innovation community by supporting research and labs at MIT or Stanford or Harvard. So that's really part of the story too, that's where, that's the impact that we can have by coming together. So we have a little bit over a minute left. One quick question about the Biotech Games. Is there still time to register? There is. There is.
So everybody, all you scientists out there listening to this broadcast, think about getting a team together.
Yes, biotechgames.org. You can go to biotechgames.org and register a team.
And then finally, the final question. So we heard a rumor that you're starting a new podcast to highlight unsung heroes in life sciences. Could you tell us a little bit about that before we go?
Yeah, real quick. I've had this idea that I wanted to do a podcast because that was part of my evangelism to introduce people to the world as part of that process. And it's really, my idea is going to be brilliant people who are not famous, right? So the behind the scenes people who are making a difference in the life science community, whether they're researchers or they work at a biotech company or they're investors or whatever, people who are making a difference. And so stay tuned for that, but thank you.
Okay, great. Well, we have 30 seconds left. Anything else you want to get out there to the public in these last few seconds that we didn't?
No, I appreciate this opportunity, Janice, and to Paul and to Hannah and all the folks. I love this series, the 17 Minutes of Science. I think is really cool, and thanks for this opportunity for me to continue to raise awareness for Fragile X and the Biotech Games. And we look forward to seeing people next week, hopefully, at the Biotech Games online. So thank you.
Perfect timing. Okay, well, with that, anyway, thanks again, Dave. I mean, you are truly a really effective evangelist, and I know some people in our audience maybe have heard about Fragile X for the first time. Might inspire some research in that direction, we hope. But anyway, we wish you all the best on all these great projects you're doing and advocating for patients and working with pharma and so on. So thanks for taking the time to be with us. And for all of you out there watching, we look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday, same time for our next session of 17 Minutes of Science.